Hey there, and thanks for checking out my session on using PowerShell-based interactive notebooks to make blue teams faster. Now, my goal here before you leave YouTube or LinkedIn or wherever you're watching this is to simply provide a quick explanation and guidance on how we as blue teamers might be able to use PowerShell-based interactive notebooks in order to, improve our speed in terms of prevention, detection, and response. Now, you might be asking yourself, what's an interactive notebook? I thought that was something called Jupyter that was Python-based and was only used by data scientists. Well, we're going to use this technology in a PowerShell native scenario to simply illustrate how we can work faster as blue teams to embed documentation and code side by side, and again, drive more effective operations in the blue team. So, who am I? My name is Josh Johnson. I'm the author and instructor for SEC 586. That is SAN's new Blue Team Operations Defensive PowerShell course. This course is all about using PowerShell to facilitate faster operations in blue teams. Let's face it, no blue team is saying, I don't have enough work to do, I'm overmanned. That's not being said in any blue team around the world right now. We're being asked to do more with less, and the goal of SEC 586 is to simply use PowerShell as a force multiplier so that we can automate day-to-day activities and really get human eyes on the things that matter. Now, I'm as guilty of this as anyone else, but one of my pet peeves is when I walk through a SOC or I just monitor like day-to-day engineering in a blue team, and I see like 15 different browser tabs. And again, I am guilty of this myself. But if you think through the example of like a phishing email, happens all the time, right? Well, if I'm looking at one, I might open a browser tab to look at my forward proxy and figure out who's going to that URL. Maybe I have another one open with VirusTotal. Maybe I have another one open with my other sandboxing tools and so forth. I'm doing whois lookups. And in my head, I'm processing all of these things, but in reality, I'm wasting time. Most, if not all of those tools have some REST API that I can interact with. And using PowerShell, of course, we can automate against those REST APIs, bring that data back to a central location where my human eyes and my analysis can provide the most value. So the idea here is to use an interactive notebook to enable the speed of the data gathering and aggregation and maybe some automated analysis, put it in front of my human eyes or my analyst's human eyes, and then let them make sense of it. So you might be asking yourself, what is an interactive notebook? Well, if you've heard of Jupyter, interactive Python, that's where this is really popularized. The idea is simple, but the power of this technology is really changing the way we as blue teamers can do our day-to-day activities. The idea is that we can embed documentation next to executable code and layer those things together. So if you think about how you might operate in your normal blue team day to day, you might have like a wiki or a OneNote where there's segments of code and folks are jumping in and they're copying and pasting into a console somewhere, running whatever's being laid out in that documentation, and then analyzing the results. Well, the idea here is that we're going to turn our wiki into a location where not only do we lay out the documentation around the process, but we actually embed the executable code as well. Pretty simple in theory. The power is how we use it. So you might have seen Jupyter notebooks in the past. Jupyter really popularized this technology and made it extremely accessible. Since I'm a PowerShell geek, we're going to use VS Code. VS Code now supports Jupyter notebooks and .NET Interactive, which allows us to leverage PowerShell-based interactive notebooks and Python and C# and any of the other languages that are supported by the platform. So the goal here is to run through a simple exercise. I'll quickly lay out a scenario, and we'll use a phishing exercise, a phishing email as an example. The goal is to lay out an interactive notebook that can help an analyst, even if they're not super familiar with PowerShell, we can pre-bake all that stuff for them, run through their analysis more quickly and more effectively. So this is VS Code. This is the IDE that I'm in, day out, obviously being a PowerShell geek. and we're going to leverage an interactive notebook inside of this platform. So here I am in VS Code. I'm going to go ahead, open up the command palette, and I'm going to create a new notebook. So notice I get two options here, create as DIB, create as ipynb. Well, these are two different interactive notebook formats, and it'll make more sense later if you're not familiar with interactive notebooks, but the ipynb format, if you've used Jupyter before, you might have seen this, is the interactive Python notebook format. Now, this is the native Jupyter file format. .dib is the new .NET Interactive Notebook format, and there's a difference between the two that you should understand before you dive too deep into this. .dib files will not save code cell output when we save the file. So if I have code that's calling VirusTotal and bringing data back for me to analyze, and I execute it and then I save my notebook, the output section of that is gone when I reopen the notebook. So for that reason, I'm going to go ahead and use the ipynb format. And notice it pops up a new interactive notebook. Again, nothing special here yet. The power is how we're going to use it. And so I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to select the notebook kernel. And I'm going to select the .NET PowerShell kernel. Now the kernel is what under the hood is actually taking the commands, interpreting them in this case, and executing them inside of a PowerShell session. And notice when I did that, the language down here changed to PowerShell. So notice I can change it to several different languages that are supported by Jupyter. And I can flip between Markdown and PowerShell, which is really the sweet spot we're going to focus on here. And so let me change it to PowerShell, and then I'm just going to take a simple command, who am I, and run it. And notice it just gives me who I am, who I am on this box. So I can run code, nothing special here. The power is when we start to operationalize this sort of thing. So I'm going to start a Markdown cell, and I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to take, if you're not familiar with Markdown, no worries. Markdown is simply a markup language that is extremely intuitive, and it allows us to take plain text documentation and convert it to, into wikis, into PDFs, all kinds of different formats, HTML that we might be interested in. And so I'm just going to start a header. I'm going to call this my phishing playbook. So again, the syntax here is less important. Same with the PowerShell that I'll show here shortly. I just want to show the power from a blue team perspective of this technology. So I'll call it my phishing playbook, and maybe I just want to give it a purpose. Analyze phishing emails because Josh clicks on everything. Fair enough. I'm going to go ahead, save that, and notice now it's rendered. This Markdown is rendered for me, so I now have the ability to do things like bulleted lists. I can do, fancier text if I'm interested in. I can bold things. I can do some basic manipulation of the text to make it look a little bit prettier. And then I'm going to go ahead and add another Markdown cell. And I'll go ahead and say setup section. Notice I'm using a lower level header here. And so I'm going to say variables. Render that. And now what I like to do with interactive notebooks that blue teams are using is I like to always use like a setup section. A setup section might have multiple components. Here we're interested in phishing playbooks. So I'm going to go ahead, and so you don't have to watch me fat finger, I'm just going to copy and paste this section. So this is PowerShell. I'm defining several variables that I'm going to use later in my code. So URL to investigate. This is the URL that you pretend this is the URL that was the phishing link delivered to an end user. Sans.org. Obviously malicious, just kidding. Attachment hash, some SHA-256 hash that I'm interested in investigating. What systems are affected? Notice, if you're not familiar with PowerShell, this is an array. When I use the @ sign followed by open parenthesis and then comma separated list in here, that's an array. So I have several systems. Now, this is important, especially for PowerShell, because if you're familiar with PowerShell's fan-out remoting, I can define all these systems here that I know are affected. And later on, what you'll see is we'll use Invoke-Command. And I can run a single command, but PowerShell can run that command against multiple targets all at the same time. Gives me the ability to fan out and use PowerShell like a force multiplier to go out and compare running processes on each system against a baseline that I might have. I can do baseline analysis against all sorts of things using this approach. And with this fan out technology, I can act as a force multiplier using PowerShell. Users affected, maybe I want to go grab from my SIM all activity done by HR admin and IT dev. Very creative names, I know. And then I'm going to grab some API keys. Now, blue teams probably should not be the source of an incident. We don't want to be the cause of an issue. And so I'm going to use here the get secret commandlet, which is part of the new PowerShell secrets management module, which if you haven't checked that out, please go check it out. Awesome project that allows you to do secret management using everything from the local Windows DP API to Azure Key Vault to LastPass or any number of vaults that have extensions built in to this module. And so I'm going to use get secret to go get API keys for my various API calls that I'm about to make. So here, my VirusTotal API key. Next, my whois.xml API key. And notice I'm just using get secret and I'm specifying the secret that I want to get and I'm retrieving it as plain text. By default, you'll get a secure string object back. Here, I'm just saying, give me the plain text API key so that I can attach it to a REST API call. So I'll go ahead and run that. Notice when you use this module, you'll be prompted for a password using a super secret password here. Very hard to guess. And so now I have my setup section done. The great thing about doing it this way is that if I define a variable up front in my notebook, later on I could have multiple markdown code cells in between here and where I use it. The variable scope, the session scope, is across the entire notebook. So this variable I define up here, I can use later on. Like notice the IntelliSense here is saying URL to investigate is assigned but never used. Well, I'm going to use it later. I'm going to ignore this warning for now because I know I'm going to use it later. All right, so now I can go ahead and start doing some basic analysis. So I'm going to go ahead, I'm going to add another markdown section here, and let's just call this one link analysis. So I have a link analysis section. Purpose, run links through VirusTotal. That's all I'm going to do here. Run my links through my VirusTotal via the API. And then again, so you don't have to watch me fat finger this, I'm just going to copy and paste some code here. So I define a URI variable. This is the path to the VirusTotal URL report API endpoint. I'm specifying my API key, which I retrieved earlier via the secrets module. And then I'm specifying the URL that I want to investigate. Again, this was defined up here. Then I'm going to take that URI and pass it to invoke REST method, which if you're not familiar with PowerShell, no worries. This is simply PowerShell's commandlet to make API calls. And the great thing about this commandlet is that when you call a REST API that returns JSON or XML, it's going to automatically convert the response object into a PowerShell object that I can interact with like any other PowerShell object. So I'm then going to access the vtresult.scans property. Let's just let that run. And notice I'm starting to get results here. I can see that based on Snort, Komodo, Fish Labs, I can see if it was detected and what the result of this is. So clean site, clean site, clean site. Again, I could certainly just open a browser tab, but the idea here is that once I have my notebook built out, an analyst can just simply update the variables, go ahead and hit the play button, execute all the cells, and all this data is right there for them. The beauty is not in the fact that I can make a VirusTotal API call, because that's pretty well known. It's the fact that I can take my custom process that's unique to my blue team with all the different unique tools that I'm using, layer them into this tooling here, this notebook, and give my analyst the ability to simply hit the play button, go, give me all the data you have on this link, this sender, whatever it might be. So let's go ahead, let's add a couple more here. Let's just do a sender analysis here. And we're first gonna do a DMARC check. And so I'm gonna go ahead and again, copy and paste some code. I'm simply looking for a text record. I'm using resolve DNS name, which just simply resolves the DNS name. For the name underscore DMARC dot whatever my sending domain is, and I think I still need to define this up here. Sending domain, let's just say equals sans.org. I'm going to just replay this here so that that variable is available to me. And then I will hit the play button here. And I can see there's a DMARC record for the domain. Again, your workflow might look totally different. I'm just kind of throwing out some samples here. Is there a DMARC record for that domain? A mail authentication record for this domain? Certainly doesn't mean it's benign. I could register any domain I want, set up DMARC, SPF, DKIM, all that stuff. It doesn't mean it's benign, but now I can at least get a little more intelligence on that domain. So let's add one more here, and let's go ahead and call it our, we'll call it our analyst notes. Or sorry, let me do system investigation. And let's take this a little bit further and say we've done all the things we would normally do for URLs and links and attachments and domains. All of that stuff's built out here for us. Let's go ahead and add something for the system specific, and we could go user specific as well. System investigation. I'm going to go ahead and say check processes on affected systems. And here's where, again, we can use this fan out remoting. So let me just go ahead. These are dummy system names here. I'm just going to add localhost to this array. That way we'll analyze my own system here. Let me scroll back down. Check processes on affected systems. Okay. And we could get much more fancy with this, and we should. Again, check out 586 and we'll talk about multiple ways to kind of baseline this data, understand if something's deviated from normal using PowerShell as the automation platform. I'm just going to go ahead and say Invoke-Command computer name affected systems. Let me just grab that. By the way, there's also an outline here. One nice thing in VS Code is that we have this outline. So as I use headers and things like that, I can structure my notebook. You can imagine these things are going to get long and complex. I can structure my notebook in a way that I can say, all right, go back up to the setup section. What did I actually name that variable? Well, I named it systems affected. I'm just going to run that again. Come right back down. And I'm just going to provide a script block to just do something really basic. Get process, we'll do select object, first one. Again, just give me a process from each of the systems affected here. I'll go ahead and run it. Notice I'm getting errors. The errors are because workstation 01, this guy here, and server 01 don't exist at all. They aren't real systems. I was just using them for dummy purposes. And notice now I have a single process from the system that's alive. So if I had multiple affected systems, again, PowerShell is doing this fan out approach in terms of remoting. It's going to go grab process information from those different systems, bring them back locally to me, and I can analyze that. just a quick intro to kind of what we can do. Obviously, being a PowerShell geek, I'm going to focus on the PowerShell implementation of various detections, and I'll focus there. But you can think, right? The sky's the limit in terms of how we can leverage this for our analysts. First is just something simple like a playbook, like how do I handle a certain situation? And so pretend I'm the analyst. I can add something at the end called analyst notes. And maybe I just say, hey, the analyst is JJ, verdict is benign, rationale is Josh clicks on everything. And so I can embed my notes here. And the beauty of this is, so think like I'm a senior engineer on my team. I'm really comfortable with PowerShell or Python or whatever automation technology you're using. I can pre-bake these notebooks for my more junior folks. So maybe they don't know how to use Invoke-Command in a way that is efficient and performant. Well, I can stage the code for them, and then all they have to do is go up to the setup section, figure out, we can teach them how to fill out these different variables, regardless of the underlying skill set, get them the ability to put the data in, hit the play button, and now they're going to have all of this automation run for them. And then they can add in here whatever notes they might have. Now, this is great for playbooks, but think about things like hunt campaigns. I have done this so many times where I'm just turning over rocks, and maybe I have a really structured hunt campaign, but maybe at one point I'm just kind of turning over rocks and I'm pivoting to different things and I'm saying, is this normal across the rest of my environment? And next thing you know, I've forgotten like where I started and how I got to where I was. Well, this gives me the ability to, as I go along, say, all right, I want to go ahead and do a pivot. Pivot, is this process normal? And I can add some notes on what my thought process is here. And I can go ahead and add some code to say, hey, go get that process from the rest of my fleet. Is there any other system where that process is running? Or is the SHA-256 hash of the executable associated with that process normal in my environment? Or is this a unique instance of that executable? And it gives me the ability to really get creative with my response. And from like, say you're like a SOC manager, having this and being able to see the thought process of a team as they work through an issue can be super helpful in guiding, improving detection or improving analysis techniques, improving those hunt campaigns, right? I might be, maybe you're a rock star threat hunter on your team. Well, you don't want to be the only person who can do that. You can go ahead, document your hunt campaign through this methodology, share the notebook to the rest of the group, and share some of that knowledge so that they can go start doing the same things. And I've seen this work in such awesome ways where, it's already a really good hunt campaign. Senior engineer hands it to a more junior person and they're like, oh, that's interesting. Did you ever pivot to this? And the collaboration here can just, make things even better. So again, quick and dirty intro into PowerShell-based interactive notebooks. I hope it gives you some ideas for how you might be able to use this technology moving forward to really enhance blue team operations, right? If you're a PowerShell hater, give me a chance. I think I can turn you. But I don't really care. If you're using Python or any other automation technology, any other scripting language, no worries. I think the interactive notebook gives you the ability to leverage this automation in a way that, again, combining the documentation with the automation technology under the hood, really do some awesome things to facilitate this faster operations within the blue team. So thank you for joining my session. I hope you learned a couple things, a couple quick tricks about interactive notebooks, and keep on the lookout for some more quick sessions like this.